What's up, witches? Welcome to season 2 of the BetterWitch podcast, presented by the Modern Witch Network. I'm your host, BronxWitch, and I'm a tarot reader, Reiki master, and owner of BronxWitch HeadQuarters, a spiritual shop and witchy workshare space in the Bronx, New York. This season, I'll be coming to you every week with a new topic and a new guest co-host to share our real life experiences as practicing witches. Because when we know better, we witch better. Today's guest co-host is Laura Tempest Zakroff. Laura is a professional artist, author, performer, and modern traditional witch based in New England. She holds a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design, and her artwork has received awards and honors worldwide. Laura is the author of several best-selling Llewellyn books, including Weave the Liminal, Sigil Witchery, Visual Alchemy, and Anatomy of a Witch, as well as the artist and author of the Anatomy of a Witch Oracle and the Liminal Spirit Oracle. Laura is the creative force behind several community events and teaches workshops online and worldwide. You can find Laura on Instagram at alchemy.arts and on YouTube as Laura Zakroff Witch. Yeah, well, so I definitely want to get into sigils soon enough, but I kind of wanted to just start on art and magic in general, because I feel like you really put the craft in witchcraft. And I love that because it's called witchcraft for a reason. I feel like the practice of magic, when you start doing and you get beyond just the learning phase, which is where we're helping witches to go. I find that I think most people will discover that witchcraft is incredibly crafty. It is very artsy, and there's lots of room for artistic expression and for making things and building things. And so if you have any interest in that whatsoever, witchcraft can be a whole heck of a lot of fun, aside from being effective and powerful and perhaps spiritual and all that good stuff. It can just be a lot of fun. So I'm wondering for you, what came first? Was it the craft, the art craft, or the witchcraft? What? Or were they kind of born of each other in your life?
So art, I can think back to some of my earliest memories. I mean, I started going to art classes at 3.
Yeah, wow.
They're like, she's not so well coordinated. Let's
We don't see sports in her future. Here is a paintbrush.
I was too busy chasing the butterflies. That was more exciting than soccer balls.
Right.
And so there was that, but I also had a very mystical outlook in the world. I was not only child. I have 2 older brothers, but they're old enough that I still was kind of off in my own world, like doing my own thing. So I spent a lot of time in the backyard, my little playhouse. That was nice. A little wooden house, and like I made my little potions and gathered my sticks and played with moss.
I love that.
So like those things, were always part of just my existence. But then you think about like craft, like nowadays when people are like, what's the difference between art and craft, right? It's how it comes to the thing, because people think about craft as first on the good side, that it's accessible, right? That anybody can do craft, and people, but at the same time think that art isn't accessible. Anybody can do art though. It's really the process of becoming attuned to what you're working on, right? To be in depth with your practice. So like, whether that's knowing when you pour the candles that you hold it at a certain way, or mixing, the incense, there's a feeling at a certain point, how it smells, it feels, it touches, in order to do the right thing, versus when it falls apart. Like that body sensation and that knowledge of doing, to me, that's the craft and the art combined. That, it's not just the thing that we're doing, it's the thing that we're being.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Finger snaps for that. Yes. I love that. And I could feel like your excitement raising, like as you were talking about that, because it is very much like something that you're being. Like when I'm in those moments of ritual where I am putting something together, I am making really anything. And it doesn't really have to be something that one would call art or maybe even craft. Like if I'm making a powder out of herbs, right? Like I'm just taking these dried herbs and just kind of grinding them down. I'm not necessarily creating something for viewership or to express a concept or a thought or a feeling, but just that hands in the dirt kind of feeling. I think it really takes us back to like finger painting,
Mm-hmm.
when we're kids and making macaroni images and stuff like that, that like getting your hands dirty and spilling paint all over the place and being okay with all of that is something that really kind of goes away as we enter into adult life, and we get fewer and fewer opportunities to just play or express ourselves in those ways. So I love that you mentioned that it's a way of being, because it really does start to kind of you and what you're making kind of mold together, and you really become like what it is that you are making, which is so cool.
And it's about making a mess too, right? It's like it's
Mm.
when you know what you're doing, it becomes more of a quantified
Yeah.
mess.
Right.
But like you're choosing those herbs, right? Because you have a specific goal in mind of how you want those to be, or you're just like, what happens when I put this and this together? How's it going to taste? How's it going to smell? How's it going to make me feel? Um, and that's the thing. You have to breathe it, taste it, work it to really get the full sensations. Like, yes, you have to make a mess. Like that's
Yeah.
the important part.
Yes, and it's okay. It's a beautiful mess. You went to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. RISD, I was looking up because I've heard the name a million times, but didn't really know much about the school. And I was like, what's out there about the school? It was founded in 1877. It is one of the first art and design schools in the United States, and it was founded by a woman as a co-educational institution at a time where that was not so common. And I thought that was so cool. I was like, man, a school like that, it made me think of Mount Holyoke, which is a college, an all girls college, but it's just one of those schools that you're just like, there are going to be a lot of witches there. I just know. I can just feel it. Um, what was going to RISD like taking art so seriously? Because there are some heavy hitters in the world of art that have come out of that institution, and so much influence on the art world from there. What was it like to spend your academic years focusing on art in such a I guess I would say structured way? What did that do for your art, and maybe for your practice?
So there's probably one of the most helpful skills that I learned is the critique process, because you spend hours and hours staring at people's artwork, your own, other
Right.
people's, gathered together, and talking about it in intelligent ways, in ways that are critical without being an asshole. Yes,
Yeah.
okay, there's still a few of those. People learn, like, it's a learning process, right? But it's like, how do you respond to it? How do you talk about art? How does it make you feel? How do you give guidance for what might make it more powerful, or, different ideas? And that's really helpful for the greater interacting with the world. But at the same time, there's a joke about RISD that it's a very religious school. Everyone
Mm.
here thinks they're God. So it was a bit different than I was expecting, because I had in summer of 1995. Oh my God, I went to an arts summer program called the Governor's School in South Carolina. It's now a full-time school, which is amazing, and I kind of wish that was around when I was a kid, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And you had writers and dancers and theater kids and musicians and the visual artists all like thrown together on a college campus for 6 weeks. That was amazing, because we really had cross discipline, and you attended what the theater kids were doing, you attended the
Mm.
music. They had Alvin Ailey Dance Company come down. We had amazing jazz trios come. Like, all of these incredible exposures to the art and different ways of making. And when you go to a school that's just visual artists,
Mm-hmm.
you're just sort of like, all right, we're all part of the same neuroses here.
Right.
So on one hand, I'm glad for the experiences. The other hand, I kind of go like, I wonder what would have happened if I went to like the University of Arts in Philadelphia, which is more of that. But you don't know when you're, college age and you're like, oh, they gave me a scholarship, I'll go.
Right? Yeah. Hell yeah. Shout out to the scholarships. For sure. And speaking of scholarships, I think it's awesome that you got to go somewhere that was like interdisciplinary. And I feel like exposure in life is helpful no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what you're doing, diversity of perspective, seeing other people's ways of looking at things, trying out new things that you are maybe really good at or really interested in, but would have no way of knowing because it just maybe wasn't around or no one around you was exposed to that. So I think exposure is really great. And I want to talk a little bit about the interdisciplinary sigil making, like the different types of sigils that are out there and the different uses of them. But before we get into that, I just want to touch on something that you mentioned, which is accessibility, because I do think that's an important conversation to be had in magic in general, but certainly in aspects of magic that touch on things like art, because I do feel like art can be one of those things that can feel cost prohibitive or exclusive to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own experience being a studio art minor and realizing the cost was too much for me, I can definitely speak to that. And at the same time, I have created art with found things that have been given to me, things that have cost me nothing. So I've seen sort of both, worlds where you can go to Pearl and buy canvases that cost $100 and, all the bells and whistles, or you can take things out of your cabinets, out of your drawers with a glue stick and kind of put them together. And so I imagine being someone who's naturally crafty, but also had a formal education in art, you've kind of seen both play out as well. For the witch out there who's worried that incorporating art into their practice is going to be too expensive, or that art is not for them because they don't have a formal education, are there things that you maybe want folks to keep in mind about the accessibility of art? And it's okay if your answer is art is only for rich kids, don't even bother. But I have a feeling that you feel differently, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are, especially for those who feel like art is just too expensive or just something they just are not trained enough in and can't get training in.
Yeah, like, especially when it comes to art for rich kids, fuck that shit.
Yeah. You're like, absolutely not. We need to change the narrative on that.
Yeah, and because that's what we get this eye, the art for the elite, like the galleries, the museums, all of that, the cost of college in general.
Mm-hmm.
Again, thanks for doing a scholarship, yay! But I've always been super, super budget conscious. It's probably part of another reason I went into printmaking, because paper is far less expensive than canvas.
Amen.
And you're like, well, if I make a small plate and then I can reuse it, and then I can reuse it, and then if I don't like it, I can reprint on the back, right? Like, it's super budget. But I also use, for a lot of what I do, reclaimed wood as much as possible. You don't have to buy the most expensive art supplies out there. You don't need to start at top of the line. I mean, archival is great, but at the same time, you can paint on cardboard. And so this last year and a half, I've been doing these big installations for the Witches Night Out Market, and giant green person face, a giant 9-foot Ouija board, and Baba Yaga's hut that's also 9 foot tall, and it's all cardboard. It's all from all right, folks, who has stuff from IKEA, who has whatever, and I have a collection of cardboard, and it's just cheap acrylic paint. It's still, some of it's still in my garage. How to recycle. I finally had to recycle Baba Yaga's hut. And people are like, what? We have too much room. I will make her something else later.
Right. She'll be someone else's hut.
It will be recycled. It's good. But the thing is, you don't have to spend top of the line on anything, especially playing and experimenting, because that is such a barrier. And I think that's that is a thing. Like when we have that like few precious dollars that we're putting towards the canvas or to the really nice oil paints, it's like, should I use this, right? And that kills the art. So I go back to make a mess, get the cheap acrylics, play with watercolor, play with the color pencils, see what you like. Do you like the process of it too? And tempera is great. Tempera is cheap. You can just add water to it. That's like why they use it in schools. It's easy to clean and it's cheap.
Yeah.
But you can make beautiful paintings with it. You can have great experiments with it. It does not have to be expensive. So, and I also highly recommend like Home Depot and Lowe's can be amazing art supply stores. So.
Yes. Especially if you need lots of stuff, larger chunks of paint and things like that. Just get some wall paint, slap it on cardboard. Works just as good. So kind of piggybacking off of the idea of like art magic being accessible, there's sort of an idea, or I don't know if I want to say an idea, but I think people come to sigil magic in particular, maybe with some preconceived notions about what a sigil is and what they mean. And I'll admit that, as a young witch, when I thought sigil, I thought seals of Solomon and planetary seals and very high magic, ceremonial magic type things written in Hebrew lettering or Greek letters and things that I like don't understand and stuff like that. And it was really cool for me going through sigil witchery and learning a little bit more about what the heart and soul of a sigil is, and that might be what comes to mind. But we use sigils all the time in very simple, practical purposes. So what exactly is a sigil to you? And maybe why do you think people only think of them in the context of like ceremonial seals and things of that nature? Why do we not think of things like the stop sign or the cross as a sigil?
Okay, so
you're like, I have something to say about that.
So I define a sigil as a mark that is made by a human being that is believed to have magical properties.
Period.
That's it. Like, so that means if you draw it, if you paint it, if you lick it, if you dance it, if it's something, it's created by a human that is believed to have magical properties, boom, that's
sigil.
That's a sigil. So that fits a wide range of things, and you can go down amazing rabbit holes of like with graphic design, right? Like in branding and logos and everything we see around us. But like when it comes to magic, right? Especially Western occultism, we have such a stranglehold on like the white male patriarchal. This is how it's supposed to be, and if you're not doing it this way, it's doing it wrong. And meanwhile, we have.
I like your white male patriarchy voice. I'm like, I know that guy. I can see. Yeah, I know that guy.
So we have this very narrow thing. So like the first time I taught sigil witchery at a huge event, I was at PantheaCon. I actually put up on the slide projector one of the Key of Solomon ones. I'm like, if you're looking for this, get out now.
We are not doing that.
We're not doing this. You're going to be miserable. Just leave the room. Go find something else to do. There's 20 other things happening in this time slot. I don't need your hate. Because we're going to talk about something that's completely different. And nobody moved. And I'm like, well, we'll see how this goes.
Right. You asked for it.
So we also, with that mindset, right, we tend to look at the grimoire traditions, right, that a sigil is used to command something, that it's very architectural, very ceremonial thing. And yet when we look at the span of humanity and our interaction with symbols and magic, it's so much more than that. It's relationships with the divine, with ourselves, with our environment. It's not commanding things. It's being in communion with them. So that whole mindset is something different too, right? It's not about power over, it's power with.
Yes, I like that a lot. I have heard many elders of different traditions say something similar in a different way, but that the idea of being a witch, sometimes is appealing to us at first because we might incorrectly think that it's about having power over the forces of nature and, I can control the rain and I can control the winds. And really what it is it's being so in tune with those things that you understand when the rains are coming or when the winds are going to blow in a different direction, and using that to your benefit way more than it is actually having power over something. And I like that idea because to me, that kind of gives power to why sigils that we see in everyday life have so much power over us, rather than taking something and saying, I'm going to make it mean this. We have all of these symbols that already, for generations and generations, have meant something to people. And I'm always so curious about like those first people that felt that symbol and said, this means this, because a lot of them have stood the test of time. And even, you'll see some symbols that will be in different traditions, different cultures, and cultures that maybe had no connection with each other, and that symbol will mean the same thing to them. And it's so interesting that happens. But really everyday things like dots and waves and crosses and X's and the heart symbol and things like that, for some reason, we kind of all feel similarly when we see these things, and we don't really think of them as sigils, but they are. And so you have a whole system in sigil witchery, where you kind of outline a process to go through of like creating your own sigils and things like that. And I won't spoil the details because everyone should take a look at sigil witchery and get familiar with this process. But what is it like at its core that turns a symbol into a sigil? Because I have found that everyday symbols like crosses or a hexagon or things like that really can be just as magical as, let's say, a sigil that a witch created, and made available in some way. But for you, what is it that helps you take a symbol that maybe is a known symbol and make it magical in your practice?
So, when you were talking about like the same thing showing up in different cultures, right? It's like, why would they have similar meanings even if they're disconnected cultures? And I think it really, excuse me.
Yeah, have that tea. I have some of my coffee.
Having some tea. Okay. So the different cultures and the same symbols again and again, while there might be different nuances and the personal interpretations and meanings, when you draw those symbols, there's an energy to it. So when you draw a spiral, it feels a certain way. When you draw that hexagon, right, we have that feeling of it. And we also have the association with nature. I feel like so much of sigils is pulling out the information from the universe around us to kind of create the map, right? So when you look at the makeup of the world around us, whether you're looking at fractals or cellular structures and wave patterns and all the protons and electrons and how they move around, like all of these have different ways of moving, different patterns that they create. And so if we're trying to solve problems, right, what are we doing? We're creating a key for that. We're describing the problem. We're creating a key or a map for that solution. And so we tap into those rhythms. So when you think about the hexagon and you're thinking, it was actually one right above my desk. It's like right there. It's a shelving unit, right? I think about honey, and I think about bees, and I think about the union and the hum and the vibration of that. Like, that's just a symbol. But we have this DNA, this mitochondrial and well-lived and spiritual experiences that connect us to so much more than that. So that's why it can have so much power, that if you just move across a horizontal line, there's a restful motion to moving your arm or your finger this way versus a vertical line where you're like up, right? We're going up, we're going down. Like there's gravity's happening, the way that the blood is moving in our own bodies and the bones and the muscles, all of that has power and subtle interpretation. So that's why I think in so many ways, like why the sigil witchery method particularly is so effective and so powerful for folks, because in everything that you draw, you determine that there's a meaning and an energy to it, even if you're not like consciously going, okay, well, this means this and this means that, like all the way down, you're like, I just feel a star. This needs to be a star, and you might figure out later why it's a star, versus just taking letters or making like one of the little Punnett squares. Like, what do those mean to you? Well, you're making a cipher. So that can be kind of cool, but it's different than choosing and selecting and combining and really unifying these things in such a way that we're energetically enhancing and connecting to the world around us.
I love that. And do you feel like that means, like when you say that, what I hear is draw your own? Because, and I love to get sigils from other witches. I've used a few of yours, I'll admit. There's another person online, Nicole Blood Moon. She makes a like sigil, like PDFs that you can download with like descriptions of the sigils and stuff. And she totally gives you the A-OK to use them in however form you'd like. And so there are a few witches that I draw from because I feel like drawing my own, like creating my own is not my own strong point. But when I take that sigil, I do insist on then drawing it myself on whatever it is that I'm inscribing the sigil on, or carving it into a candle or what have you. I could just like print it out and like, glue it onto something or tape it onto something. But I do feel like it matters that I at least like draw it once and put like my own energy into it. Do you feel like that is an effective way of activating a sigil? And like even if we get, well, first of all, what are your thoughts on getting sigils from other people? Which I imagine you support it because you put sigils out there. So it'd be weird if you were like, never use other people's sigils. But what are your thoughts on that? And do you think we should, if we take sigils from other witches, at least like draw it at some point or recreate it in some way for ourselves?
Yeah, definitely to start with that, to draw it for yourself and to feel it under your own hand or your own body, and so is so important for that. When it comes to using other folks' sigils, so everything that is it's on my blog, are what I call the shared magic sigils, and also in Visual Alchemy, we have an archive of over 50 of like the most prominent, useful ones for a wide variety of different people. And what happens with those is, explain what goes into it. So what words and what symbols, how and why it was created, how to use it. And so therefore becomes a tool that you can connect with, because you're like, oh, I see how it was made. I see what it means. Now, what does that mean to me? And as I draw it, I'm also adding to that relationship. And shared magic sigils take another level of power, because the more people who recognize it and see it, the more that energy is emphasized in the world. Right, so that people connect to, like the stop sign. Like we all have to agree that stop sign is where something we stop at. Like we learn, we use it, we know it. Except for the California roll, which is you're like, we just roll through this. Like we also have that, right? Like you just roll through.
I acknowledge it, but
I recognize that there are rules here, and sometimes we're just gonna flow through that. But when it comes to that, like that's a very precise. It says exactly what it's for and how to use it. Versus something that's like, this is a sigil for love. Okay, well, whose love? What kind of love? What does that mean? Is it like a really hot one night stand kind of love? Is it something that's self-love? Is it family love? Is it, drawing a life partner to you? Like, what is it for? And so like using somebody else's sigil that you don't understand, where it's like there's not enough information to say that, which is a lot of the ones that come from a statement, like a simple statement, don't go into the amount of depth that the brainstorming process of sigil witchery does, where we're like, this is for this, and it wants this in this time frame and this time, like what does this look like? And that can be more easily communicated to others. So that's the kind of difference. Like if it's something that's for a communal cause or is really well explained, that you're like, I understand it and I get it and I know exactly what's happening, perfect. If it's some random thing off of Tumblr, just keep going.
Right. That will probably, if you're going to work with something like that, will probably need a lot more work to really make it your own and really mean something to you. It might be like a starting point maybe, or an inspiration, but you probably have to get, deeper with that for sure. And I feel like creating your own sigils is like a self-exploratory process and a expressive process in a way. We talk about writing petitions or choosing candle colors and things like that. And for me, that's just creating your own sigil is another element to adding the right energy to what it is that you are doing. You can get really specific with a sigil that you create for yourself. So if you are making something for love, you can really, there's the heart, right? We all kind of resonate with that as meaning love in some way, but that may not be exactly what it is that you're trying to manifest or that you're trying to influence. And so adding your own element to that is going to really make that message to the universe so much more clear. And I think that's important. We talk a lot in magic about how important your intention and the clarity of your intention is to actually seeing results as close to the way, I feel like the universe always has its own spin, but as close to what it is you are trying to make happen as possible. So I think that's really important, to keep in mind that it's making your own sigil is not just, it isn't sort of just like a random suggestion. It really is an excellent way to really infuse your own intention into what it is that you're doing. So if you start with a sigil made by someone else, then certainly at least drawing it or replicating it in your own way is helpful, I think.
Yes. Yeah, you really have to. Magic starts with thought. Right? It's how we conceive it. Think about all the times you've started to think about doing a spell, and before you even got into the candle or the herbs or anything, it's already happening. Like that's how powerful our minds are. And often, we often have this idea of like what we think we want.
Right.
Like this is what I want. This is what I need. Right. And then when you actually get down to it, you realize, oh, is this really what I want? What does this really look like? And so you're visualizing, not just in the picture of the mind, because I know the folks have aphantasia, can be like, what does it mean to visualize? But like, what are the ingredients, whether that is a visual component or a psychological component to these things, or you're going, all right, I want a new job. What kind of new job? Oh, well, I wasn't respected in my previous job, or there was no room for advancement, or I hate open office, or I want to work from home. All of those things help you get a clear idea of what it is that you want to manifest or bring into your life, whatever you want to achieve, right? Versus just like, new job.
Yeah, exactly. It helps you really specify things. And I guess that is part of the inspiration behind your latest book being called Visual Alchemy. Is all about the visualization component that goes into turning something into something else. The first step really is the idea or the thought that you have of what it is that you want. And when it comes to Visual Alchemy, this is a newer release. It just came out in the fall of 2022. So Sigil Witchery has been with us for a little while now, a few years now. So I definitely hope that folks, if you haven't picked up a copy, you get your hands on one and check it out. When it comes to Visual Alchemy, what is it from that book in particular that you're hoping each witch really takes from that book? So I'm excited to get into it. I see that you explore different areas of the craft or of our lives that we can address with visualization and creating sigils and art around those ideas. So I'm curious if there's a particular part of the book that you're hoping that we all pay attention to.
I think one of the biggest things about Visual Alchemy is that art is accessible, and that we often hold so many barriers and boundaries in our own minds, all right, when it comes to making art. So they're very similar to the boundaries and issues that we have with magic, right? We can talk about, oh yes, we believe in magic and spells and rituals and that, and at the same time experience so much doubt because of because of society, like the overculture that we live in. At the same time is like, we've watched too many movies, or whatever denigrating thing they're going to say about it. And like, that's still part of you. Like, whether you want to admit it or not, like, we still live in, it's the soup that we live in, right? This is the fishbowl. And so you have to kind of purify that out to go, all right, I can make art. It's not about, is this good enough to hang up on a wall? Is this museum quality? Like, fuck that shit. It's, it's about what is happening in the process of exploring your ideas and your surroundings. And what I talk about in the book, that visual isn't just what we see with our eyes, but what we feel and express with our whole bodies. Because you don't just hear music, right? You can feel music. Even if you can't hear, you can understand the vibrations in your body. And some people, when they hear music, they see colors. It's like there's so much to our senses, and it's not just the 5 senses or 6 senses. It's a whole epiphany of sensations that are happening here. So my hope is that more people feel empowered to make art, to really release themselves from their fears. And not only will that help you in the realm of art, but it's going to help you in the realm of magic in your witchcraft immensely, because it's not just making a painting. It's the atmosphere that you create as you're doing a ritual. Like, all right, what colors were we doing? What incense are we setting? What's happening in here? What's the feel of this? All the things that we can make and create, share, and collaborate with each other too. Because art is a collaboration. It's communication. It is not a competition.
Yeah.
And now I think it's time to take a little break and stir our cauldrons.
This show is part of the Modern Witch Podcast Network. For more shows like it, visit www.modernwitch.com.
Yes, I love that, because there's definitely pressure when you're making something, especially if you tell yourself like, this is a piece of art. It's like immediately kicks in that competitive edge of like, is this going to be good? Is it as good as the next person's? Like, maybe I shouldn't make my own because it's not going to be as good as someone who's been doing it for a while. And so I think that's reassuring for me, certainly, to hear that it's a collaborative effort. It's not a contest, and we're not, there may be awards involved. I know you've won some art awards, but it's okay if your art is not up for an award. It's really about the how good is that piece of art, whatever it is, at expressing what you want it to express, and does it really reflect what you're trying to create? Because if it doesn't, maybe that's areas that you can address to really like fine hone what you want. For me, I have found I like taking sigils from other witches. As like I said, I don't really consider myself the best creator of sigils, but I might play with them or tweak them a little bit. And I certainly make sure that I'm drawing them or redrawing them on whatever it is that I'm working with. But even more than sigils, for me in my practice, vision boards have become so key. I've made them for like the last 5 years, and it's just been incredible how each year more and more of what I put on my vision board comes to be, and I get better at working with it. But one thing that I have learned in those few years of doing them consistently is they seem to be more effective when I focus less on a particular thing and more on the feeling around the thing. Because when I first started making vision boards, they were kind of more like goal list, like goal checklist, like I want to accomplish this and I want to accomplish this. And that was kind of stressful, because then it felt like, well, I've got to get these things done.
Right.
And over time, I've stepped away from looking at it as a list of goals, and that I actually write somewhere else. Like I have a list of goals somewhere else. This is not about the things I must accomplish in 2023. This is about the things I want to see, the things I want to experience, the ways I want to feel, the like maybe fabrics I want to touch, or colors I want to experience, or just like moments I want to have. And I feel like sigils really do that, because they kind of force you to distill what it is you want into something that evokes an emotion, as opposed to being like, I want a house, let me put a picture of a house. Instead, I create a sigil that sort of represents the way I want to feel in that house. So maybe my sigil is actually like just a circle for a house because I just really want to feel like contained, and I want to be indoors, and I want to be protected on all sides. So yeah, I love that idea of like the visualization being even more than just like a goal or a thing to accomplish, but a representation of a feeling that's really sometimes easier to define than the thing that's going to get you the feeling.
Right. And that also goes into our intuition, right? To trust our gut intuition and, really allow ourselves, like the heart, the witch's heart to speak, to see through and guide us rather than being like, what is in our head? Because we often like live too much in our heads.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Right. So like, and your head doesn't always know all the things, but the rest of your body, like when you sit with what's in your belly and what's in your heart, and you're like, oh, that goal's not really what I want. It's this experience. Or, like, especially when it's undefined, when you just don't know what is the next thing. What is it that I want? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think of it as like the brain lies, and it definitely does, but the heart does not.
Right.
The heart does not lie, right? Your brain is like being pumped full of like chemicals and sending messages all around your body that do all kinds of like nonsense things, and your brain literally makes things up in order to fill in gaps that your eyes can't understand, and it's nonsense up there. But in your heart, it's a lot more clear. So focusing on that, I think, will help you generate sigils that are really, very accurate to what you want, because they're based more on how do I want to feel? What is the feeling around this desire, as opposed to the thought process of what must it look like to get me there, or what's the process for getting there? I wanted to ask you about ways in which we use sigils, because we talked a little bit about designing them and where they can come from and where we can find them. And thankfully, we do not need to be world-class artists or, in order to make one. So in case you were worried about that, folks, Laura has dispelled that concern for us quite well, which is great. Get out there, make your sigils with whatever you find. But I wanted to talk about some ways to employ these sigils. Once we've whether we use your method or we've come up with some way in which we want to create our sigils or find our sigils. Now, what are we doing with them? And what are some of your favorite ways to actually apply sigils? Are you straight to the carving on a candle, or maybe there are some more interesting ways in which you tend to use sigils to kind of put your intention into the magic that you're creating in your life?
That's a great question, because there's so many different ways of doing it. So a little teaser about the sigil witchery method is step 4 is to apply and or acknowledge your sigil, which is a not necessary step. Yeah. As I was with people, like for those of you who like to take a shortcut, you could just do 3 of these things. You don't have to do all 4, because you can draw the sigil, close your book, notebook, whatever, your grimoire, and call it a day, and it's already in process. But because we are human beings, we love the ritual experience. We love the stuff. We like being able to do the thing. So it's also why I don't use the word really activate, because you are already charged, right? Because you've given it a purpose. That's one way of charging it. You've also put your energy into it by paying attention to it. That's also another way of charging it. And your brain has already said yes the moment you've finished it, right? So it's already activated. But we love to see what we're doing put into the world, right? We'd like to have the physical experience. So that anything that we do with a regular sympathetic magic spell, you can do with the sigil. So you could, draw it on a candle and light the candle, or you can dance it, right? So if you think about the shape of it, and you're like, okay, there's a star, and I feel the star, and there's a circle, right? Like however you want to do it. It's like, again, it's not choreography, it's not a show. So if you feel like this looks dumb, doesn't matter. It's how it feels.
It's not a competition, guys.
It's not a competition. Like nobody's laughing at you. I mean, of course, the spirits might be laughing at you, but they're going to enjoy your enthusiasm.
Right.
There's the things like, okay, what's it for? So if it's for protecting my house, how do I use it to protect my house? Am I putting it on my hearth altar? Am I doing it on my front door or my back door or any of the doors or my windows? Does it need to be visible? Does it need to be invisible? Right, depending on the situation, your living situation, you might not want sigils very visible. Mm-hmm. So you might draw them with incense or blessed water so that they fade away. Or you might be like, no, fuck it, I'm painting it on my front door.
Yeah.
Back door or whatever, or incorporating into my evil eye that I'm hanging on the other side of it, like it's painted on the back of that. Is it something that I want to release out into the world? So maybe I'm going to draw it out with like breadcrumbs or bird seed so the birds can come down and take it and disperse it out into the world.
Oh, I love that.
That's a fun one. That's one I mentioned in Sigil Witchery. So folks like, I mean, there's other interpretations that, is it something you want to incinerate? So that you might burn it, but you might not. You might submerge it into water and let it dissipate. You might plant it into the ground. Especially like say you're doing a memory sigil and you're like, rosemary connected to memory. So if I plant this next to the rosemary or I have a pot, let's decorate it with the sigil that I put rosemary or a ginkgo tree. That's another one we tend to associate with memory, right? Like you tie it onto that with something natural that won't hurt the plant. Like it's endless creativity for what you can do with sigils, or you don't have to do anything at all.
Right. And I love that you mentioned that because you do see, if you're doing sigil research or learning more about it, you do see witches talking quite often about the process of activating the sigil in order to work with it. So that's kind of a little bit of a different perspective than I've heard before. The idea that conceiving of the sigil and drawing it out really is the activation process, that you could put it into a journal and really that's the spell. And I have seen some witches cast spells like right on their grimoire pages. I've done it a few times and I find it to be really effective and really cool because it's something that you revisit every time you open that journal. You kind of put energy back into it again by looking at it again and not just, drawing it and forgetting about it. But I really like that idea that the activation process really happens with the creation and the drawing of the sigil in the first place. And the things that we do beyond that maybe further hone the intention for it. A protective sigil making sense to go on the doorway or in the front yard or something like that. But that isn't necessarily the activation of it. Just coming up with it already really imbues it with all of the energy it needs to mean something.
Exactly.
I think that's so cool. You also mentioned in Sigil Witchery, that's a tongue twister for me, tattoos. And I am a tattooed individual. I enjoy the process of, getting tattoos. So that one, stood out to me as being like, ooh, yes, I do really, really love that. And I know that you have some of your sigils tattooed on you as well. Can you tell us a little bit about which sigils you chose, if they're not too personal, to be tattooed, and why you felt like the way to deploy those was on your own body?
So I would say there's kind of between 3 to 4 ones on my body. I think I have 8 now. I've lost count wherever I'm at. But the first pieces I had right here was on my breastbone. Is a combination of different symbols and sigils, and it was at a point in my life, 2010, 2011, where I'm just like, I am in an abusive relationship. I don't see a way out of it. I feel so much pain in my heart, and this is to protect me and to honor my path. And in 2011, I started the divorce process. I sure within the span of getting that tattoo, it's like boom. So like,
congratulations.
Thank you. Yes. That's always when people are like, I'm getting divorced. I'm like, congratulations.
Yeah, no, I know the feeling.
Yay, it's so exciting. So that, placement of it and the symbols chosen, was really about like moving forward where I needed to be and to continue to protect my heart. The ones that are on my legs, those I designed for really connecting with myself, connecting the academic and the artistic parts of my brain and my body, and to balance those out. And so you kind of having on my thighs, it's something I look at every day. I can see it in the bath, in the shower. There they are. And I think those were 2014 to 16. I can't recall. Time. What is time? Who knows?
What is time?
What is time?
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't
That's what
exist
Jaden Smith says anyway.
It's all myth. And I really feel like so much solidified in my life for those concepts coming together in that time frame. And it's still something that I continue to acknowledge every day. Like, all right, here we go. And then we have ones that we do for dedication with working with particular entities, or which can also be parts of ourselves. So, I've got something else like that on my body too. So it's like, this is what's necessary. This is what I can connect to on a daily basis. And it's not like this is a sigil. It's just becomes part of how we view the world around us. So it's informing our vision in other ways.
And do you have a go-to artist for your sigils, or are you like me, just sort of tipsy on West 4th Street, stumbling into places in the middle of the night?
So far, the three main artists that have done the ritual part, they have all been women. And they all have had a ability with drawing lines that looks very much similar to my own hand. So that's a huge bonus. Like, having seen like the first piece here, I designed a giant back piece for a friend, and having seen how that artist translated the back piece, I'm like, that looks like I drew it on her back. Like, that's amazing. Because I like one piece on my arm I kind of designed, and then the artist did his own thing, and I'm like, that doesn't look like my art anymore.
Right.
But I appreciated his art style, so it's like, that's fine. But like, to see that, like, okay, so this is almost like applying it myself, through that process. So that was one artist in Indiana, and then I found somebody here in Rhode Island who, same thing. They just do a great job. So that's happened too. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like I'm seeing more and more tattoo artists that either specialize in some types of sigils, sacred geometry, just spiritually charged pieces in general. And here in New York, there is an artist named Michelle Gonzalez. So shout out to Michelle, who like specifically draws sigils and like tattoo sigils, and will like take your sigil and recreate it or create one for you as a part of her own practice. So I'm seeing that a lot more, and I think that's really cool. The idea of taking a sigil and actually having it be a part of the landscape and the canvas that is your own body, because I feel like that's kind of one of our first canvases. Really, we see tattoo, some form of tattooing going back like to the beginning of time, really. I mean, we did it first with more of like scarification before we started rubbing pigments and things into those scars to leave an ink mark. But we've been kind of branding ourselves with symbols that have symbolic meaning, kind of since the start of this whole human evolution that we've been on. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to incorporate sigil work into the modern art of tattoo. So I think that's really beautiful that you've added those to your body.
Thank you.
Yeah, so those are lots of ways that you guys can work with sigils, from drawing them with chalk on your doorway to, I love the idea of like breadcrumbs in a shape and giving it to the birds. I've done something similar in my practice where I kind of drew the sigil in a loaf of bread with like a sprinkle of some herbs and seeds that were on the top and things like that. I do see there's one question in the Q&A that I want to hit you with, just in case you have any thoughts on this. Is there a specific ink used when it comes to tattooing sigils?
I would say whatever ink is going to be archival, archival and appropriate for your skin. That's, I leave that up to having an educated artist who knows what they should, because they're always doing different things. If you mean by color, it depends on, well, what's your skin tone, what is the meaning behind the sigil. So like the one that's on my breastbone is kind of is an indigo blue. And that was just like what felt right. Where the ones that are on my legs are black, but the great thing about black ink as it ages is it becomes a sort of bluish, like that grayish blue, which I appreciate, and I kind of it's like you love it when it's fresh, but you also like it when it's old.
Yeah, I feel that way. Yeah, about tattoos and tarot decks.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, both. I'm fascinated by the white ink, but I keep hearing there's new developments in that, but it's like, that's almost, something like, how does it age in the skin? Again, how does it read on different skin tones? It seems to fade in a lot, regardless of skin tone. So that might be something, if you're looking for almost like an invisible mark that's not quite as scarring, that could be something too, where you're going to have it, but it's, it's going to fade away regardless of what skin tone you have. So
yeah, I've seen there are all kinds of developments. I've seen like UV ink where you don't see it unless you put a black light over it. So that might be cool too for folks who are looking to have like a hidden sigil that people can't see so readily. That's actually really cool. If you ask me, especially if you spend a lot of time like clubbing and like black light, that's going to be pretty dope. I wanted to give you an opportunity, Laura, to let us know about anything that you're working on or that you have just worked on that you really want to make sure that everyone is aware of. And where can they find you to continue this conversation or learn more about the projects you're working on?
All right. Well, the thing that comes out in 2023 is the Gemini Witch, which is part of a new series from Llewellyn that is all the sun signs in collaboration with Ivo Dominguez Jr. Love Ivo.
Yeah.
Yay. So that comes out this summer, not in the month you think it would, like May or June. I have nothing to do with that. So opinions, but I have nothing to do with that.
Right.
Printing takes a long time. Like the whole process takes a long time, folks. So I'm kind of still coming off the combination of like Visual Alchemy and Anatomy of a Witch, and also the Gorgon's Guide to Magical Resistance, like just all landing at the latter half of 2022. So it's like all of that's going on, but I've got some things up my sleeve, so we'll see what happens. And you can keep an eye out on lauratempestzakroff.com. We'll get you to all of my social medias. It'll get you to my Patreon, which is where folks see all the art and ideas before they make it out into the world. Some things that never make it out into the world, but you get to see like things like this behind me, how it develops. I take shots of that. So I'm around.
Well, thank you guys so much for your questions. Laura, I want to thank you so much for the time that you have spent with us today. You have shared so much information about art and magic, about sigil witchery and sigil magic. And I just appreciate it so much, because when we know better, we witch better. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for everybody for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, witches, for tuning in to another episode of the BetterWitch podcast. New episodes air on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on the BronxWitch Coven YouTube channel and your favorite podcast platforms. No matter where you're tuning in from, we want to know what you think about today's episode. So please make sure to leave us a review wherever you are. A special thank you to BronxWitch Coven members whose membership makes this episode possible. If you'd like to tune into the live recording sessions, watch the behind-the-scenes footage, and participate in the Q&A for future episodes, consider joining the BronxWitch Coven. You can support this podcast by grabbing some sweet merch over in the BronxWitch merch shop, sponsoring an episode with an ad spot, or following us on Instagram at BetterWitch Podcast. Remember, witches, when we know better, we witch better. See you in the next episode, and blessed be.